With the help of Hashem, we are learning Chagiga Daf Chav. We left off on Daf Yutes Amid Base, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. It's a very important Daf today. We're going to spend a lot of time on Daf Chav Amid Aleph. We're going to be touching on many foundational halachas that are connected to the laws of purity and impurity, and beginning with chulin, non-consecrated food, was treated, especially during the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, by many people. It was treated as if it was holy food. In other words, people, whether they are kohanim, that have to be constantly up to date with and very accustomed to keeping the standard that Truma has to be kept in, people that wanted to go into the Beis HaMikdash, even non-kohanim, and wanted to continuously make sure that they're not tamei, that they're eating kachim, they're eating consecrated food, as one is allowed to only when they are in the state of purity, making sure that the food does not become impure inadvertently. And there are so many dinim regarding Tumah and Tara that their solution was to treat their food, their chulin, non-consecrated food, as if it's kosher. These are called the people that would eat chulin al taras hakodesh. There's really a machloikis whether that approach, whether that hachlata, whether that higher standard of living has any halachic effect or not. Some are of the opinion, very nice that you eat or you treat your chulin as if it is kachim. Good for you. But it doesn't change the halacha of your chulin. Others were of the opinion that the people that undertook to eat chulin al taras hakodesh, their chulin actually became susceptible to the dinim of tumah and tara like kachim. Meaning that if a person is a sheni, stam yadayim are shniyos, and they touch chulin food, it becomes a shlishi. And if it touches kachim, the kachim becomes a revi, as is the halacha of all other kachim. And we're going to see how, through learning our Mishnah and our sugya, our Gemara takes a side in this argument. And indeed, as we will see, chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh, our Mishnah holds, gets the standard, actually has the standard of kachim. It could become actually tummy, of course, rabbinically, all the way up unto the level of a revi. That's going to be topic number 1. We're going to come back to that in a moment. Topic number 2, which is an equally important topic. There is something called hesech hadas. Hesech hadas means a diversion of attention. Hesech hadas means that when will something remain pure? Only if it is consciously and uninterruptedly guarded from it having any contact with tumah. If something wasn't constantly, and again, it's consciously and uninterruptedly guarded by its owner, that nothing tamei will have contact with it, it will lose its standard, it will lose its status of it being pure as far as truma and kachim is concerned. And that's the concept, that's the halacha of hesech hadas. And we're going to see many details about this concept of hesech hadas. What constitutes a hesech hadas? There's going to be a havamina in today's daf that if I am guarding an item from it not becoming tummy, I'm mindful about it. But I thought I have item A when I really have item B. That in itself is a hesech hadas. There's such a havamina that won't be accepted. There's going to be a concept in the Gemara called niterusa lapalga, guarding something only partially, as we'll see details. And really, we already introduced this concept of partial guarding in the Mishnah on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, when one of the stringencies, which is called a ma'ala, a higher standard, midrabanan, that we learned in the Mishnah, is that if someone is a parush and someone is being constantly careful for their garments not to become tamei, but if this person was only guarding it, let's say for truma, as far as kachim is concerned, it's considered tamei. That's an example of, is it guarded or not guarded? The person that's guarding it for it not to become tamei on the level of a shlishi will tell you that I know nothing that could make it tamei had contact with it. If it had no contact, then it's not tamei nekuda. But we don't say that. We're going to find other applications of this idea of partial guarding. And by learning the sugya, especially Daf Chav, we're going to become familiar with many details of the laws of Tumah and Tara. These are not difficult to understand, but it's a question about gathering enough information for us to appreciate and to better grasp the sugyas that we are learning. So first of all, let's start inside. We left off on Daf Yutes Amud Beis, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amud. The last topic that we had in this little Amud on Daf Yutes Amud Beis was when we were speaking about if someone, Big Day Perushim, this concept that a beged that is worn by someone who's mindful not to become Tameh, but if he was not guarding it for Truma, it's a non-Kohen, he was only making sure that it remains pure, then as far as someone who eats Truma is concerned, we have to presume the worst. And what's the worst? Not only is the garment of these people Tameh, but it's Tameh on the level of a Midrash. Just to explain what that means. There are certain people whose source of Tumah is because Tumah left their bodies, and that's going to be a Nida, and that's going to be a Zava, and that's going to be a Zav, that's going to be a Yoledis, that's going to be a Mitzvah. That if they sit upon something that's meant to be sat upon, or if they lay upon something that's meant to be laid upon, not only do they convey Tumah, but that item becomes Tameh on their same level. They are an Av, and that which they sat upon becomes an Av as well. With other chumras, this is all midah iraisa, even if there wasn't direct contact. The example the Mishnah gives, if you have 10 mattresses and a Zav lays on the top one, all of them, even the bottom one, becomes Tameh on the level of an Av. Same thing would go, let's say, to shoes. Shoes is a keli. A keli in the dinim of Tumah and Tara doesn't only refer to utensils, it also refers to garments. They are called kelim. Well, a shoe is meant for people to put their feet in, and it holds up the body weight. That's an example of a midrash, something that's meant to receive the weight of the person who's tamei. Shoes of a zav become an av. So if you have a person who says, I made sure that no zav stepped into my shoes, fine. If he wasn't guarding it specifically for Truma, as far as Truma is concerned, it's considered a midrash. Now, what the point the Gemara was making until now is that it appears that our Mishnah skipped the step of Meiser Sheni. And as we keep on mentioning that really we have 5 levels going from the lowest to the highest, from the least holy to the most holy meaning it is the least sensitive to Tumah. It can only become Tameh on a level of a Sheni. It cannot become Tameh on a level of a Shlishi. So we have Chulin, what we spoke about, Meiser Sheni, Truma, Kachim, and Mechatos. When the Mishnah was speaking about this concept that if I guarded it only for a Parush, but not for something higher, it's a Midrash for that which is higher, the Mishnah skipped the level of Meiser Sheni. Truth be told, we learned in the last year, quoting a Mishnah in Para, that really there's a machlokes between Avneir and the Chachamim, whether we consider Meiser Sheni a notch holier than Chulin. There's a machlokes. But our Mishnah that in the beginning did make such a step, when it spoke about the dinim of Midrash, it skipped over the step of Meiser Sheni. So the last thing we learned before we're going to continue is that there was actually those who had another version in our Mishnah, and the Mishnah added that additional step. In other words, the sugya we were being medayik, that why is it that the Mishnah on Daf Yutes Amud Beis skipped? It only spoke out the general parush. From there it went to oichlei truma. From there it went to people who eat kachim, and from there it went to people that are dealing with mechatos. Now we're going to speak about another potential step that was skipped. What's that other potential step? So again, people, a parush means someone who was careful not for the person, nor for his items, nor for his food, nor for his drink to become tamei. And there are many people that have no such obligation. If a person is a non-kohen and they don't plan to go into the Beis Hamikdash, they're not allowed to eat truma, they really don't have to make sure that the food is not tamei. People nevertheless did that. But it wasn't they did it or they didn't. To what level were they keeping? So if there's a person that decided to keep their items away from Tumah, the way Kachim is kept away from Tumah, that's called people that eat their chulin al taras hakodesh. Like we mentioned in the intro, there is a machlokes whether that has an actual halachic effect on their food items. One opinion says no. It's a good training. So now that they become so familiar how to keep their food away from Tumah, they're going to be more secure with themselves that when they want to go into the Beis Hamikdash, if they're given kachim, that them and their families know how to make sure it doesn't become tummy. But the chulin itself remains chulin. The other opinion is no. If you decide to eat chulin al taras hakodesh, you rabbinically change the status of your food, and it becomes susceptible like kachim does. So what is our Mishnah's opinion? Amar Rav Mari Shmami, no, learn from our Mishnah that chulin that is kept shenasu al taras hakodesh has the standard of kachim. Has the standard of kachim. Look inside Rashi, the second to last Rashi would be the third to last, the second to last. Shenasu al taras hakodesh odim haragil lechol kachim. Person who wants to be able to eat kachim or who eats kachim quite regularly. It was common mekabel olav lechol chulav on the same standard of keeping tara like by kachim. Why would people do that? The last line in the Amud and Nashi. Mashiach is coming. It's like Hilchas Shabbos. People that are already keeping Shabbos don't have a hard time keeping Shabbos. There are so many dinim. Well, you keep on reviewing it by living it. So the solution of becoming, of approaching the laws of Tum and Tara, one solution is make believe all of your food is kosher. So what now will have the standard, says Rav Mari, our Mishnah holds, it actually has the standard of kachim. Mimai, what's my proof? Because we didn't add yet an additional step in the Mishnah. And like Rashi spells it out, why didn't the Mishnah say that big day Pirushim, people who are not Amaratzim, well, they don't want to become Tamei. They want to eat their food betara. So for the higher level is a Midrash, is automatically considered Tamei at the highest level, an Av, for people who eat their chulin b'taras hakodesh. Why didn't the Mishnah say that? The Mishnah says their clothing is a Midrash for people who eat kachim, not for people who eat their chulin al taras hakodesh. The fact that Mishnah didn't add this additional step is arayah that people that eat their chulin al taras hakodesh is mamash kachim. So the Mishnah already mentioned it. It's included in that step of for truma, and certainly anything under truma is considered midrash for people that eat kosher. Counters the Gemara back inside the Gemara, the top line. No, that's not approved because maybe the Dilma hide the loikatani buhumayla. The reason why the Mishnah didn't add this additional step or this separate level is because maybe it doesn't have the standard of kodesh, but we're going to learn other Tanoim from other places who held that it does become imbued with the standard of Truma. The Mishnah spoke about Truma. The Mishnah spoke about Kodesh. So the Mishnah doesn't have to go into this question. Whichever one it is, it's going to be one of the steps that are mentioned in the Mishnah. Truma, according to the opinion that holds that it has no halachic effect at all, so it remains chulin. The Mishnah spoke about chulin. In other words, actually, what we see over here is really there are three opinions. Either that my hachlata, to treat my food as if it's kachim, has zero effect. It remains chulin with all of the laws of chulin. In our context, it cannot become tamei more than on a level of a sheni, cannot become a shlishi, can certainly not become a revi. Or even though that I behave with my chulin, I treat my chulin as if it's kachim. It doesn't get the standard of kachim, but it gets the standard of truma. The other opinion holds it gets mamish the standard of kachim. These three opinions, whichever one will be, is included in one of the steps of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah didn't have to mention it. And the Tanan, chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh, opinion number one, harein kechulin. Rabbi Elazar ben Rav Tzadok Omer, this is a Tana, harein ketruma. So therefore, you have no raya from our Mishnahs, or at least not from this part of the Mishnah, to which Rav Mari responds, you're right. I quoted the wrong part of the Mishnah to back up my statement, but my statement stands. Our Mishnah is of the opinion that if you resolve, this is not even a verbal resolution, this is an inner resolution, that I'm going to treat my chulin as if it's kachim, it upgrades rabbinically, and it makes my chulin susceptible to tuma mamish, like kachim, and or it can make kachim tamei. That means if my hands are yadayim, stam yadayim ashniyas, and I touched my chulin, If not for me choosing to eat my chulin al taras hakodesh, my chulin will remain pure, because chulin cannot even become a shlishi. But since I decided, me and my family, that we're going to treat our chulin as if it's kachim, then the food becomes a shlishi. And if my chulin touches kachim, the kachim has to be burnt. Wow, because the kachim became a revi. Now, by the way, just a little detail about the last statement that I made. We learned this a lot in kachim, that whenever truma or kachim becomes tummy only on a level of midrabanan, truth is you can't burn it immediately, because burning truma and burning kachim, if it's tahar, biblically is a problem. It's prohibited. But midrabanan, it's tummy. So what you need to do is you need to wait until it becomes problematic biblically, and then you burn it. Like by kachim, you wait for it to expire. You overnight it. Now it becomes nicer. Now that it became nicer, now you have to burn it. But let's go inside. But says Rav Mari Elami Sefer. My proof stands that when it says at the end of the Sefer, we gave two examples, that even someone like Yossi ben Yoaseh, which wasn't just a kohen, he was considered a chassid amongst the kohanim, and therefore he made sure that there's no tumah in his house. He made sure that none of his food can ever come near tumah. Nevertheless, says the Mishnah, that his kerchief was considered midras av hatume as far as kachim is concerned. That's one example the Mishnah gave. Then the Mishnah says Yochanan ben Gudgada, who would eat hoya oichel al taharas hakodesh kol yamav. Yochanan ben Gudgada was not a kohen. Yochanan ben Gudgada, however, wanted, like Rashi said, Mashiach is coming. I want to always know whether I'm tummy or toid. I want to be confident that all of my family members know where they're at, toid or tummy. If they're not going to continuously practice the dinim of tum and tara, they might mistakenly think they're toid. So he was someone who made sure that his family treated all their food as if it's kosher. Nevertheless, says the Mishnah, what does that imply? That only for the highest, most delicate item, which is chatos, we're saying that means mechatos. For that was this kerchief considered midras av, but l'kodesh itself. Why? His mitpachas was considered pure for kodesh. Why? Because he treated his chulin al taharos hakodesh. What does that prove? That our Mishnah subscribes to the opinion that if you treat your chulin like taharos hakodesh, it actually gets the din of kachim as far as tum and tara is concerned. Al mokasavar chulin shenasu al taharos hakodesh ke kodesh damim. Okay, sort of muddy stance, and we just clarified the source that he found from the Mishnah. Before we speak, before we learn three dinim right now, I just want to repeat the following. To appreciate the sugya, aside of the fact that we should mature into appreciating just taharas by itself, I want to propose perhaps a link we have in Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Zayin, and the Rebbe wanted us to constantly learn the Torah of Geula and Moshiach, so it's good to become familiar with it. The Gemara tells us on Amud Aleph that Gimel Boyim Behesach Hadas. There are three things that happen. Behesach Hadas means when you're not expecting for it to happen. Moshiach, Mitzia, and Akrov. That Moshiach will come when we are in a state of Hesach Hadas. Or finding a lost item. People don't go around spending their time looking for someone for a lost item. At least most people are not treasure hunters. When you find it, like, wow, you were not expecting it, and boom, there on the sidewalk, you have $100. Same thing getting bit by a scorpion. You got bit by a scorpion because you were not watching, paying attention. If you would be paying attention, you wouldn't have gotten hurt. But let's focus on the Moshiach. And it's very bothersome because we were educated to constantly be mindful about Moshiach, to be asking for Moshiach. We daven about Moshiach. Everyone speaks about the Tefillas are filled with Moshiach. So when you learn in the Gemara that the Mashiach is going to come when we are Behesach Hadas, I think the solution, it's not a problem because our Gemara is going to enlighten the meaning of Hesach Hadas. We're going to learn, Hesach Hadas means the diversion of your attention, the diversion of my attention. I have to be focused and mindful in our context, guarding my item, making sure no source of Tumah touches it. That's called, I'm mindful, I have Das. And if I have a Hesach Hadas, if I am not mindful, even though I don't know if something tummy touched it, and we're going to see how nuanced this is, then rabbinically, it becomes tummy. Okay, so let's now learn this concept of Hesach Hadas, and the Gemara is going to tell us three dinim 3 rules, and we're going to challenge them. And because of the challenges, we're going to clarify and better appreciate the tremendous novelty of that which we are learning. Rule number 1, halacha number 1. We are quoting 3 Amoraim. Number 1, Amar Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar. Let's try to remember the names and what they said. So when we quote their names, we know the topic. If you have a person, okay, let's just take one quick review. During the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, there were certain people that, for whatever reason, decided to become lax in the laws of purity and impurity. Truth be told, you didn't need you, if you're not a Kohen and you're not planning to go into the holy temple, to your tummy, it didn't change your life. It's like now we are all tummy. We are all tummy on the level of an Av. We have halachic contact with the corpse, and we can go about our lives fully observant. So many people, now when you go into the holy temple, then you have to go through a purification process. Say that. So then they spent a week, they got ashes of the red heifer thrown on them. But people became very lax. And because of that laxity, or because of their non-practicing and not reviewing the laws of Tum and Tara, so the Chachamim said, by default, we have to presume their tummy. Other people who are called, they were called the Am Ha'aretz, the commoner. The other one, the Parush in the singular, or the Perushin, people that kept away from Tumah. And sadly, it also meant they needed to keep away physically from the Am Ha'aretz. Because if the Am Ha'aretz would come and tell you, hey, Shalom Aleichem, of course you should respond. But if you would shake their hand, then you would have to presume that you're tummy, because you are presuming that they are tummy. So the Perushim were those who removed themselves from the general society, and they made sure to stay on a level of Tara, without going into the nuance, which level, Tara, Truma, Kachin, just general Tara. I want to make sure that I know what's happening with me and with my belongings and with my food and with my drink. So this Parush is wearing a ma'afarta. He's wearing a shawl. He's wearing a beged that you don't stick your hands through it, or you don't stick your feet through it, so it can relatively easily fall off you. A scarf, that would be a taich. So his scarf fell down. And instead of him picking it up, he told his colleague, Tanuli, please pick it up for me. And his colleague picked it up and gave it to him. Says Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar, that's called Hesech Hadas. Boom. Tameyon. Why is it Tamei? So Rashi really enlightens us. Look inside Rashi, 12 lines from the top. Va'afilu, even if the one who picked it up is Tahar, even if the one who picked it up is not an Amaretz, the one who picked it up is also a Parush. Ulakaman mefarish time. Later we'll get the reason. So, but let's jump ahead a little bit. Chazaka ein adam mishamer ma shebiyat chaverim. Even if you are right near me, this level of mindfulness, making sure that no source of tumah touches me or my items, is only done when it's under my care, when it's in my hand. The moment something is in your hand, and I know you're a parush, so I am not guarding it. You can be guarding it, but I am not guarding it on that level. As we learn the sugya, we'll see, I'm not blind, I'm watching it, I see it. I see that nothing tummy touched it. It's not enough. There's a certain type of focus. I have to make sure that no source of tumah can touch it. And it's not so simple, because sources of tumah are many. There are many, many dinim. I don't have that level of guardianship. That in itself is called a diversion of attention. Now the question is, okay, I don't guard what's in your hand, but why may I not rely on your guardianship? Because in many cases, I could rely on your guardianship. So Rashi explains why that also won't work over here. Lefikach, who the owner, I'm reading inside Rashi, lo shemara b'yad chaveri, wasn't guarding it on that level. The person who picked up my shawl, he didn't care to guard it. Why didn't he care to guard it? Because when I asked, let's say it's Reuven and Shimon, when Reuven asked Shimon, please pick up my shawl, he didn't verbally ask Shimon, are you tahar? He didn't ask him that question. So Shimon, who's doing the favor, thinks to himself, He didn't even ask me whether I am tired or tummy, which means he doesn't care. The Meimar Omar Kivin Sh'Amar Li Tunali, since he just only pick it up. For who any idea, he doesn't know im tummy ani im tired, if I am now tummy or tired. Even if I'm known to be a parush, what do you think? A parush never became tummy? A parush can go to a lavaya and become tummy. He didn't ask me that. It means he thinks that Reuven doesn't care. So Shimon, for that moment that he gave it to Reuven, he wasn't focused on this level of guardianship. He picked it up and gave it to him. Now, guys, appreciate the novelty here. Reuven and Shimon are standing in the same place. There was nothing there. You don't have any tumah there. All that happened was Shimon picked up the shul and gave it to Reuven. Midrabanan, this is all rabbinically. Midrabanan, the shul becomes tummy. Wow. Because of the rule that ein adam shomer mashbiyat chaveroi, and because of the second rule is if I ask you to do something and I don't explicitly ask you, 1 second, before you touch it, are you tired? If I don't ask you that question, you interpret that to mean that right now I don't care that much. The moment you sense that I don't care that much, the level of Shemitah you don't have.
Why can't you ask can't you assume that the other person is already tahor and rely on that?
So how can I assume that Nisano? Even a parush, Mashiach is coming. We will all be parushim. We all want to go into the temple. But just because we are we are constantly practicing these laws, it doesn't mean we don't become tamei. You have to understand something. I'll give you an example. A woman becomes a nida. It's natural. Her bed becomes an av because it's mitras of a nida, which means that biblically, if I touch the bed of a woman that's a nida, I become a rishon. Biblically, if I touch even chulin, I make it into a sheni. You see, the laws of Tum and Tara, when we're going to practice it, it changes the way we go through life on an external way. But there are many, I just give you one, there are many dinim. It's like many people, the Alter Rebbe concludes Tanya almost the second to last thing is to learn Hilchah Shabbos. Because if you don't practice and learn, B'shoigig people break Shabbos. Same thing with Tum and Tara, it's so many halachas. So if I imagine we're both standing together and my shawl falls down, my scarf, and I say, Nisano, please pick it up for me. That's it, Tamei. Now, both of us know that nothing touched it. Hesech Hadas means just that. It means you have to be constantly, there's a certain part of your brain that's always like looking around. Is anything Tommy touching it? Could have anything happened? If we lose that, even though when we look backwards, we know nothing touched it, doesn't matter. Hesech Hadas. Let's go weiter. Halacha number 2. Amar Rav Yonasan ben Amram. Nischalfu lo kelim shel Shabbos bekelim shel Chol. Huge chiddush. I have Shabbos clothing, as we all should have, something at least for Shabbos special, and Big Day Choil. Even a parush who's careful that no source of tumah should touch their clothing, they would still guard their Big Day Shabbos more than they would guard their Big Day Choil. What does guarding more mean? People should appreciate this. It's the same laws, but they were more, it's like, I give you just a mashal of Gashmias. People that are clean. They don't want their garments to get dirty. But still, when they put on what they consider their fancier suit, they're going to be more mindful. Not a person that doesn't care if the weekday suit gets dirty, but since it's more expensive, there's a higher level of guardianship. I'm just borrowing that mindset when it comes to Tum and Tara. So even though the parush's mindfulness for weekday clothing suffices to keep it pure, but since he guards his Shabbos clothing on a higher level, and now he actually took out Shabbos clothing, he thought it's weekday clothing, he was only guarding it the way he guards his weekday clothing, that's already called Hesech Hadas. He lowered the standard for these clothing. Wow. And they become Tamei. Halacha number 3, Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Rav Tzadok. Now, okay, let me just add a nuance. I jumped ahead. This is what I said right now is the real reason behind it. But before we come to the end, the first understanding of this halacha was based on a havamina that's not going to stand, that whenever I am guarding one item, but I think it's item A, the moment it turns out to be item B, that's called hesech hadas. Not because of this higher standard, lower standard. Stop. When you guard one thing, if that's the case, that would mean that if I put my hand into a basket and I think I'm taking out an apple, and I took out an orange, since I was holding on to one item for a moment, thinking it's something else, it already had hesech hadas. That's the havamina now. And Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok, according to this understanding, rule number 2 and rule number 3, it should be the same thing. The Gemara is going to address it. Rule number 3, so just to know the names, Yonasan ben Elazar spoke about the shul. Yonasan ben Abram spoke about that I took out what is big day Shabbos, thinking it's weekday clothing. It automatically becomes tamei. And number 3, Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok, it once happened that there were 2 women that, for example, they went to the bathhouse at the same time. And they were both chaveros. Chaveros is the feminine for a chaver. That means that they belong to the people that were very mindful, making sure that none of their person, none of their food, none of their drinks, none of their kalim have any contact with tuma. And if it does, they know about it. So they both went into the bathhouse, and when they got dressed, they accidentally, each one put on the garb of the other. That is chalfulahem kilei mebeis hamerchatz. So again, they were guarding. Each one is guarding, making sure that no tumah touches them, no tumah touches their clothing. But they didn't know that they thought they were wearing their skirt, they were wearing their friend's skirt. And also the timan. And based on the havamina, the rule number 3 and the rule number 2 is based on the concept that if you're meshamer davar, becheska shehu davar zeh, benimsa shehu davar acher, you're guarding an item thinking it's one thing, and it turns out it's something else, even if both belong to you, or in the second case, it belongs to someone else, it's not called guarding. See, coming back to Mashiach's coming b'hesech hadas, now you understand that. You can be thinking about Mashiach the whole time. It can sometimes still be called hesech hadas. There's a certain heightened level of mindfulness that's needed for it to be considered that you're not having hesech hadas. Okay, so now let's go and challenge. And ultimately, we're going to, through these challenges, we will enlighten all of the 3 dinim. Question number 1. Maskav Rab Oishia, based on the Havamina, that the last 2 dinim, the last 2 out of the 3, is because if I'm guarding item and I think it's item A, turns out it's item B, that in itself is considered a diversion of attention. If a person sticks their hands into a basket and they think that they have wheat bread, and to take out paschitim. Turned out that, most of the bread was made out of wheat, but there was 1 loaf of bread that was made out of barley. And from when they took it out until when they looked at it, for that second or 2, they thought they're holding on to something else. Are you telling me that any time I think I'm guarding A and it turns out it's B, even though I was guarding it, I was sure nothing Tommy touched it, automatically that's called halachic diversion of attention? Hachinami din itmeis? It's not logical. And if you're going to argue, yeah, well, that's the rule. Rabbinically, that's the rule. No, it's not the rule. I prove it to you from a brayse. If I have a barrel and I'm assuming that in the barrel there's wine, and it turns out that in the barrel it's oil, then Shal Shemen says the brayse to hoira melotame. It will not give off tumah. In other words, just because I had a mistake in identity, I didn't know what's inside, it doesn't negate the fact that I was guarding it. I wasn't relying on your guard. I was guarding it. So I thought it's wine. It turned out it was oil. Doesn't matter. It's the fact that I discover later it was another item doesn't negate the level of Shemirah. Number 1. So the Gemara says, hold on. If that's true, and by the way, that's true. If that's the case, Amos Seifa, why does the Brayse say that in the case that we just mentioned, even though this barrel cannot convey tumah, but you cannot consume it, why not? So the Gemara is going to answer that. That will be the other big din that we're learning today, as we mentioned in the introduction. Partial guarding. Amazing concept. Amar Rav Yirmiyah, the case of the Brayse was, aside of the fact that you thought it's one item and it turned out to be another item, which we will say is not problematic. But here there was another nuance. another knech, another wrinkle. That ba'omer shematia midavar hametama v'loy midavar hapoisla. Amazing. A person is mindful. I'm very aware of my surroundings. I know what's happening. But there are some times that a person, for whatever reason, says, all I care about is that the item, in our case, it's a food, it's a liquid. I don't want something that's an av to have contact with it. I'm using the words metama. I just want to explain what these words mean. One of the ways the Tanoim hinted to us whether they're speaking about Tuma on a level of a Rishon or Tuma on a level of a Sheni is that, like we mentioned, if something becomes Tumi, it acquires Tuma, and it's able to also convey Tuma, that item is called Tumi. If something acquires Tuma, but it's already such a weak level of Tuma that it can no longer convey the Tuma, it's called Pasal. In the world of Chulin, the end of the line is a Sheni. So like this, if an Av touches the oil, that's the case over here, or the wine, which means the wine or the oil will become a Rishon. A Rishon is able to convey Tuma even in Chulin for one step down. We call that Tameh. So when it says, I was guarding it, midavar hametama, that's another way of saying I was guarding my barrel that no Av should have contact with it. Because if an Av would have a contact with it, then it would become Tameh, because it would become a Rishon. A Rishon can make even Chulin into a Sheni. But I said, I was not keeping it away from a Rishon. See, if a Rishon were to have contact with the barrel of wine or oil, it would make it impure. But it would only make it impure on a level of a Sheni. A Sheni cannot make Chulin into a Shlishi, so it would be called Pasal. In other words, Rabbi Yirmiyah is introducing a concept that even though there's a person that has no Hesach Hadas, all of their antennas are up. Nothing has, but if I am only focused on, I don't want an Av to have contact with it, Midrabanan, we presume a Rishon had contact with it. And that's why the Braisa says that that barrel cannot be eaten. Because since you were not guarding it from a Rishon, maybe it's a Sheni. Now, parenthetically, I just want you to know that biblically, I can eat something that's a Sheni. I could eat something that's a Sheni. But then we learned rabbinic laws that if I eat food that's tummy, remember that? I myself become tummy. They were concerned that kohanim, while eating a sheni, while it's in their mouth, would put truma in their mouth. We had that whole sugya. Because all of these are rabbinic laws on top of rabbinic laws, on top of rabbinic laws, which is something unusual, basically only by Tuma and Tara. In most other cases of the Torah, we don't make double rabbinic laws. Not in the case of Tuma and Tara.
Rabbi, how does he know he's guarding it from an Av versus a Rishon? How is he differentiating him? How does he recognize that?
So, Trevan, we are not practicing enough these dinim. But once we are so into the dinim of Tum and Tara, and we know the many sources of Av, that's all I was focusing on. That's all I'm focusing on. Even though I'm focused on it. And I can tell you post facto, nothing had contact. We don't care. We don't care what I said post facto. We need that while I'm guarding it, what am I guarding it from? And we need for me to guard it from any source of Tumah. And if I'm guarding it only from a higher level of Tumah and not from a lower, that's called Hesech Hadas. Wow. So the Gemara wants to know, where do we find such a concept? Is there part guarding? Mar says, yeah. And here's the case. This is not a question. This V'atanya is benichus, that's a proof. It says in a Braisa, Hoshet Yodav Asal, just an example. Person is sticking their hands into a basket. We're speaking about a basket of figs. It's also important to note that for what we are learning, his hands going in it is not relevant. But there's other pratim of that Braisa. But we're going to focus on the fact that I have on my back a basket of figs. The basket is on my shoulders. And in the basket, there was also a shovel. They used to press their figs together. And when you would eat those figs, you would need a utensil to properly break them apart. So unbeknownst to me, there was also this type of keli, this type of knife, they called it a shovel, that was inside the basket. Now the carrier of this basket, he was mindful, making sure that no source of tumah touches the basket and the figs in the basket, but he didn't know that there was a shovel, so he wasn't mindful regarding the shovel. Says the Braisa that, you know what? I mean, this is a different type of partial guarding it, but we're going to get to the exact sum. Hassan taught the basket and the figs remain pure, but the magrifa is tamei. Now, by the way, this is another application of partial guarding. You see, it's different. Before we were speaking about I'm guarding all of it from an av, not from a sheni. Here we're speaking about partial guarding. I don't even know that there is another utensil in the basket. So I wasn't focused b'chlal on that utensil. Now hold on. Now we got a problem. The problem is, you ask the Gemara, how can the basket or the figs remain tamei? Once you're telling me that rabbinically the utensil is tamei, so why wouldn't the utensil make tamei the figs? To tamei hamagrefa l'sal. The magrefa that now is tamei, again rabbinically, because you were not yet hesa chadas, you didn't even know that it's there. Why won't that impurify the basket? The basket. So the Gemara tells him, no, ain't kelim and tama keli. Generally, a keli cannot be an av. There are exceptions. A keli is only tamei on the level of a rishon. A rishon cannot make a keli into a sheni. Biblically, there is no tumas sheni by kelim. But still asks the Gemara, but biblically, food could become a sheni. Once the magrefa, once the utensil, once the shovel is tamei rabbinically, why doesn't it automatically make the figs tamei? So to answer that question, now it's mamish partial guarding. Amar Avina, the case is ba'omer. The person says that shemartiv midavar shemitamatoi, I was guarding even the shovel. It wasn't that I didn't know there's a shovel. I was only making sure that an av doesn't touch the shovel. If an av would have touched the shovel becomes tamei because then it's an ishain and it can make chulin into a sheni. But I wasn't guarding it midavar hapoisli. That means that I wasn't specifically making sure that a rishon doesn't touch the keli. Now, by the way, a rishon, like we just mentioned, if a rishon were to touch the keli biblically will never become tamei. Rabbinically, if liquid that's a rishon touches the keli does become tamei. So there was a certain type that's called real. That's the exact concept of partial guarding. So bottom line is that we proved from the cases we gave above that if I'm guarding item A and it turns out that I was guarding item B, as long as I was guarding it from all sources of tuma, it is considered good guarding. So our initial understanding of rule number 2 and rule number 3 is wrong. So we call him kashem. So we have to explain now the second and the third rule. And now va'oid, the way we'll learn the Gemara is going to ask a question which will make the first rule also problematic. The rule of Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar, of someone's shul falling and they ask someone else to pick it up. And all of that, again, will further clarify these 3 dinim. What's the question which will be on all the dinim, even on the first? It says in a Braisa, there was a woman that once came in front of the Tana Rabbi Yishmael, and she tells him, Rebbe, I wove a garment. Now, a couple of interesting dinim. Not every keli is susceptible to becoming tamei. A utensil that's not a finished product cannot become tamei, even if the worst source of tamei had halachic contact. Now, a keli, for example, when you are weaving a garment, prior to it reaching the minimum size of three finger breadths on 3 finger breadths, it's not considered, not even good for a patch. It's nachlal not a keli. So when you weave, just to tell you interestingly, in the beginning of the weaving, you don't have to be mindful. But from a certain point on, you got to make sure that no source of tumah touches it. This woman didn't have that level of mindfulness while she was weaving it. But she says, now that I finished weaving it, I'm looking back, I'm thinking back, I remember everything that happened, and I know that no tumah touched it. In other words, she wasn't mindful while she was weaving it, but she's confident now that the whole thing took a minute. So she wasn't mindful for that 1 minute. And when she finishes, let me think. Okay, no one was in the room, no one spoke to me, nothing happened, nothing changed. I know for sure that nothing tummy touched it. Is it good or not? So Rabbi Shmuel tells her, okay, if you were not mindful while you were weaving it, maybe it became tummy. And he began to ask questions. From all the questions that he asked, she remembered that Rebbe, there was another woman here who was a Nida. She was pulling the same spool of thread. Now, guys, a Nida is an Av. And when she moves something, even indirectly, it's called Tumas Hesed. Everything that was moved by her koyach becomes tamei. So what? Now she wasn't paying attention to that detail, and when she thought back, she didn't remember that detail because no one directly had any contact with the thread that she was using. But she remembered that a nida did hesed. She moved the spool, and therefore the beged is takatame. So Amar Rabbi Shmuel, Kama Gedolim Divrei Chachamim. Now you see how important it is to follow the words of the sages. When they said that at the time you have to have guarding, Shmira is not looking backwards. Only if at the time you are involved touching, making, carrying, then you're taught. We trust everyone as long as they were mindful b'shas ma'aseh. But post facto was never good enough. Always tamei. Another story. Shuv ma'aseh be'isha achas. Shabbos l'fnei Rabbi Shmuel. And Amar here's the case. Rebbe Mapa Araktia. I was weaving a cloth. Bitara. Same thing. I finished making the cloth. I'm looking back. There was no tumah here. But while I was weaving it, I wasn't that mindful. So again, he began to ask questions. She remembered, never like this. Nima nifsikoli. There was a thread in the cloth that broke prior to it having the minimum size of 3 finger breasts. I was then a nida. And I used my saliva to mend it, to fix it. But I knew then that since the cloth is so little, it's not halachically considered a beged yet. But you know what? There's a possibility, says Rashi, that the saliva didn't fully dry. And later, when she went to the mikvah, she was taught. And when she finished the size of the cloth, maybe some of that saliva was moist enough for it still to be considered saliva, which, by the way, is an av, and the whole beged is tamei. I tied it with my mouth again. Maybe some saliva was there. So again, Rabbi Shmuel, Kama Gedolim, the first wide line, Divrei Chachamim, Shoyo Oimrim, Believe L'Shamra Toy, Aim Believe L'Shamra Tamei. So how was this posed a new question? The way that the Shainim explain, point is that we accept that post facto, looking backwards and saying, I'm certain that in the past no source of tummy touched it, is not accepted. But if the libay l'shamrei b'shas ma'aseh, then it's enough. The libay l'shamrei, if you are making sure it's not tummy, then it's guarded from tumah. So this really is also a question on Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar, which is rule number 1. My shul fell and I asked you to pick it up. Why would it not be good? So let's go. Bish loyme Rav Elazar ben Rav Tzadok. Rav Elazar ben Rav Tzadok, my friends, is case number 3. Right, the 2 women that each one put on the garb of the other in the bathhouse. Kol achas v'achas imeres chaverti eshes ha'ma'aretz. Maybe the reason why it's tamei is because no one knows. The case was no one knew the other. One woman wasn't certain that the other was a chaverta. Maybe she married into a family of amaratzim who are not careful, making sure their things don't become tamei. And therefore, the moment they became aware, this garment belongs to a wife of an Amaretz, the owner doesn't care whether it's started or tamei, you lose automatically that level of mindfulness. And that lack of focus, making sure no source of tamei touches it, that rabbinically makes the item tamei. That will be the reason. In this Rabbi Yonasan ben Amram, which is case number 2, right, I have Big Day Shabbos. I put them on thinking the Big Day Chayil. Nami, this is what we explained when we learned it in the beginning. 3 lines from the bottom. Kiv and the Kalim, the Shabbos, Avadu Shimmer Tvei. Since I guard my Big Day Shabbos more than Big Day Chayil, Even though I guard my weekday garments from Tumah, and that's a valid guarding, but my Shabbos garbs, I am even more mindful. So concerning the garb, I lowered the standards. Here is where I thought about what we mentioned about the Mashiach comes behesach hadas. In other words, even by us, even people that the Rebbe succeeded in educating us that we should always be mindful about Mashiach, there are different levels. Sometimes we are more mindful, sometimes we are less mindful. The moment there is a lowering in that mindfulness, that's called hesach hadas. Ella, the second to last line, halacha number 1, why is it that if I saw, I'm guarding my shawl fell, I asked you, please pick it up. You picked it up in front of me. Why would it become tummy? I am guarding, I am watching it. It's not that I didn't see it for a moment. The owner was in visual contact with that item the whole time. So says the Gemara, here we have the 2 rules that we read in Rashi. These are rules. Yeah, we have to just let it sit a little bit. Rule is chazaka ein adam mishamer mash b'yad chaveri. The moment a keli, a utensil, food or drink is in your hand, I am already not guarding it on the level to say that I didn't have hesach hadas. I guard that which is in my hand. If it's in no one's hand, but it's in my possession, if it's in my home, I'm also guarding it. The moment it's in someone else's hand, they are the ones that need to guard it, not me. And now let's add step number 2, which we read out in the Rashi. I spoke out from the Rashi before. Even if, when I asked you to pick it up, even if you are a Parush, but the fact that I didn't ask you whether you're Tameh or Tar, my lack of asking that question triggers in your mind, in the one who's doing the favor's mind, he didn't ask me if I'm Tar or Tameh. Must mean that right now he doesn't care. Maybe he's also Tameh, maybe the shawl is anyways Tameh. Why wouldn't he ask me that? So his understanding that the owner doesn't care also creates the fact that he doesn't have the proper shiur. Hesach hadas. You got a hesach hadas. 1 second. You're telling me there's a rule that ain adam mishamer mash b'yad chaveri, which by the way will stand? I got a problem with that. Why? The Hatanya daf chav amid beis. It says in a brayso, if a person has donkey drivers or poyalova workers, and they are working for the principal, so the uven has chamarav or poyalov, and to umim to harois, and they are carrying the taras of the uven. Okay, the case here will be, let's say they're carrying barrels of wine. This will be an important nuance. I want to just say another given rule that earthenware utensils don't become tamei even if a source of tuma had contact with it, if the contact was only on the outside of the utensil. All earthenware utensils can only absorb contract tuma if the source of tuma went inside its airspace. This in detail will be important. So let's say Reuven is the owner. Reuven is someone who's a parush. He has a barrel of wine, and up until now, he was guarding it. There's no hesach hadas. He gave it to a donkey driver. He gave it to a worker. Now, even if the donkey driver is tamei, just by him carrying or grabbing, having contact with the barrel, it does nothing to the barrel. He will only potentially make the barrel and the contents tamei if he puts his hand inside of it. So says the Brayso, even if the owner became distant from this donkey driver or from another type of porter or worker, even more than a mil, far away, nevertheless, that which is in the barrel remains pure. In other words, like we mentioned, it's earthenware. The only way it would become tamei is by the donkey driver sticking his hand inside of it. Question is, why don't we have that suspicion? And the answer is because the owner is guarding it. Now, just to know, a mill, 3,000 feet, you can see. So maybe the reason, the question is, why doesn't the contents become tamei? because the owner is looking at it. So we don't accept the rule that I don't halachically guard that which is in your hands. That will be the kasha. Well, let's finish learning the Braisa. If the owner tells this worker, go ahead, and I'll catch up later. Now we say, the moment we lost visual contact, then to Hairos of Tameas. And now the question is, Maishna Reisha, Maishna Seifa. No, it's based on Rabbi Yechanan's statement, which will stand, that Ein Adam Mishamer Masha Miyat Chaveiroi, that even in the Reisha it should be Tamei. If not for Rabbi Yechanan, I understand the difference. The Reisha must be speaking about a case where I can see it. So I saw that my workers did not stick their hands in. But now we're saying it doesn't make a difference. That was the halacha. If you pick up my shawl in front of me, I'm also watching it. It's not good. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. I don't guard what's in your hand. I don't guard what's in your hand. The only reason, in the case of the Reisha, why even though the poil or the donkey driver is carrying it, it's not tamei, because prior to me, the owner, giving my worker that barrel, I saw to it that my worker went to the mikvah. So even if he would have touched the wine, he cannot make it tamei. So I don't guard what's in your hand. But the worker is able to guard it because it's in his hand from someone else. So the issue is never whether the worker touched it or not. The case is only b'metayer chamad of payal of lakach. Now, by the way, it's not enough that I took you to the mikvah, because maybe the poil was previously tamei to tumas meis. So it means that I saw to it that he was sprinkled with the third day and on the seventh day, like oy gevalt. The worker got paid a lot of money for that, but that was part of the preconditions. There was never a fear that the one holding it himself touched it. Even if he did, it wouldn't matter. But there is, but there is still an issue. Maybe someone else touched it. And now you'll see the difference between the Reish and the Sefer. So if you want to hold on, if that's the case, if we know that he's pure, so even in the Sefer, it should remain pure. So the Gemara says, yeah, he is pure, but someone else can touch it. And don't forget, Chavra, that people that were Amaratzim, they were lax. So if someone else were to come, I mean, the worker is a mensch. The worker would ask his friend, are you Torah? And he would say, yeah. And Amoritz would trust him. It's like many people say, I'm kosher. It's not about trusting them. They think they're kosher. Their house is, God forbid, not kosher because they don't know enough halachas. Same thing happened then. They all meant well. It's this Amoritz, this worker might allow someone else to take some wine out, not because they don't care, because the Amoritz felt that the other person is tahor. Someone else might touch it. He doesn't care that much because he'll ask him and he'll be lying what he answers. So if that's the case, so again, what's the difference in the Reisha? Why is it that in the Reisha the contents remain pure? So the answer is, and now you get the mill. By the way, people can see far away if there's nothing obstructing your vision. I can be within a couple of feet of you, but if you are on one side of the wall and I'm on the other side of the wall, then there'll be moments that we cannot see each other. But if we are within a certain distance, even if here in the case, the worker knows that the owner cannot see him this second, but he might come from the other angle. When you're going on a road, he says, well, if you'll be coming down the road, I'll hear your hooves of the horse, but you might come from a side street. As long as you are in a place where the worker knows that you might just appear, he'll make sure that no one else touches it. That he knows, because of their not being that far apart, so it's more than a mil, but there's a possibility he knows that, the owner might appear. Maybe if he's coming from north, I'll know prior, I'll hear. But if he comes from the west, I won't know that. So the Sefer also, he also might show up. And that knowledge that the owner might show up will prevent him from allowing anyone else to touch it. So the Gemara says that since the owner told him, you go ahead and I'll catch up, he basically told the worker that I'm not immediately behind you. So the worker mismach somchadatayu, so he's more lax. And if another colleague of his will come and will want to touch the contents inside, and none of this is illegal. There were deals. There was a certain amount of my worker can consume a little bit of the product, or the worker feels he'll sell a cup of wine and then he'll tell the owner and he'll give the money to him, and let that other person put the cup and take out some wine, take out some oil, we are afraid that happened. So, and bottom line is that there is a chazaka that even if I see you, the moment my item is in your hand, I have hesech hadas. But you have the ability to guard my item. But when there is a scenario where you might not guard my item, like in our case, I didn't ask you whether you're tired or tummy. I just asked you pick up my jacket that fell down. So you also don't guard it properly. And that lacks of guardianship is called a diversion of attention. It's called hesech hadas. And the moment there's hesech hadas, that item rabbinically becomes tamei. Wow. And with this we say, Hadran aloch ein darshin, that we concluded the second chapter. And God willing, in next class, we're going to start the third and the final, not only Perek of Chagiga, but the final Perek of the entire Seder Moed.
Rabbi, in the case of the two women from the same committee that were marked over to MERCAVA, how can you apply hesech hadas?
So the case was, so what we learned that if I know, Yakir, that you're a parush and I'm a parush, then I will guard your garb. When these two women, if they would have known each other, and each one would have known that the other woman is careful, then I could rely on the other. It's like if I'm kosher and you're kosher, same thing. I can go and eat in your house.
Right, one
second. The case the Gemara gave is that these women did not know each other. They went to the bathhouse. So when one woman realized, oh, I'm wearing that woman's skirt, I'm gonna return it to her. But she's not that careful about the laws of Tum and Tav. Even though
the fact that it says Chaventa made me think that they the same comedy.
I'm very happy you're saying that. It's a charaya that Chazal rightfully call Kol Yisrael Chavedim, and Chavedim, the Gemara says clearly that they don't know each other. The Gemara says that they don't know each other enough. Chaverta, but she can be Chaverti Eishes Ha'aretz. She's my Chaver. That was the whole challenge, that we have to remain close. Like even now, I want to bring it nowadays before we go on to the next class. It's very difficult. You create, not by us, Baruch Hashem, people eat kosher, but a typical Chabad house. You have people that you become friendly with them, and they want to have you over. What do? So if a person knows they're not kosher yet, it's easy. But many people nowadays, same thing. They think they're kosher. They're not kosher from their ignorance. They have all the Mesiras Nefesh, but they don't know.
They don't have the knowledge.
They don't have the knowledge. So the difference is, it's a problem. Okay. Here we go. Wow. It goes from good to much better. Here we go. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Chagiga Daf Chaf Aleph. We left off on Daf Chaf Amid Beis in the beginning of the third chapter. And the third chapter is called Chomer B'Kodesh. Chomer B'Kodesh means that the rabbis made 10 or 11 unique rabbinic stringencies, or the word ma'ala means a higher level, almost like a step. They put kachim in 10 or 11 areas on a higher step even than Truma. So when we learned, let's say together in the Sugya Shabbos, Daf Yud Gimel, right, the Shmoina Asa Davar that was enacted in the attic of Hananya, in the attic of Hananya ben Goring. I'm missing one name over here, but the Shmoina Asa Davar, which was rules that they enacted to upgrade the standard of Truma. We're going to learn here in Chagiga 10 or 11 standards, which makes Kachim on even a higher level than Truma. So we're going to learn through the Mishnah. We're going to explain each case at least a bit. A lot of it will have to remain open because the subsequent Gemara is going to go case by case by case and explain them. Just one of the many dinim that we're going to learn today, at least in the beginning, will touch upon the law of chatzitza, of an interposition when something is taken to the mikvah. You have to make sure that all of the of the body is exposed to the water, at least in potential, and certain items that are on the body or are on the utensil, they create a chatzitza, they interpose, they separate the waters of the mikvah or of the mayon from that item. So we're going to learn certain rabbinic stringencies connected to the laws of chatzitza. That will be at least the first case. We're going to learn towards the end of today's daf a very important rule when it comes to a mikvah, that even though if it's not a mayon, but if it's rainwater, aside of the fact that you cannot first put it in a utensil prior to it being inserted inside what we call the mikvah hole in the ground, but the mikvah water needs to have the minimum amount of 40 sa. If you have a gathering of water here, less than 40 sa, and on the side of it you have another mikvah that has the right amount, or even more than that, even if this hole has mayim she'uvim, has tap water, and on the side of this mikvah, or underneath the mikvah, there is a proper halachic mikvah, if you connect the waters one to the other, if you create hashaka, then the validity of one permeates the other. What do I mean by connecting the waters? So there has to be a hole with a minimum size known as kishifoiferes hanoid. They used to put water or wine then in certain leather pouches, and there was a standard size spout or tube. Noid means it, and that standard size tube, as we'll see in a moment, towards the end of the shiur, is a tube in which one can comfortably insert two fingers, which is the index finger and the middle finger in it, and turn their fingers around. I know that everyone has a little bit of a different size fingers, but that's as close as we find in the Tanoim a precision of a shiur. So if the hole is that size or larger, then we consider these two waters properly planting itself one in the other, touching each other, and the validity of one affects the other in a positive way. If the waters are touching through this opening, but it doesn't have that minimum size, then the water, the body of water that is not kosher, remains not kosher. This is very relevant because nowadays, because of the beautiful upgraded level of hygiene that we all have, the waters of a mikvah, let's say that a woman who's a nida, who biblically has to go to the mikvah, goes into, is not mayim she'uvim. It's really tap water. The reason why her immersion in that is 1,000% kosher is because even though the waters that you actually enter are not rainwaters, they're mayim she'uvim, but since on the side, and according to Lubavitch, the Rebbe Rashab, underneath it, I know here in Pico Robertson there is both, under and on the side, there is another real kosher mikvah in which women won't enter, because if women enter it again and again and again and again, it's going to get dirty. And cleaning out the water by taking it out, you can't do that because it's not so simple to get the water there halachically in a kosher way. So the solution is that you have on the side of the mikvah, a real mikvah, and the body of water that you go into is koshered because of hashaka. There's something else called zriya. We're not going to get into all of these details right now, but we're going to be learning a little bit about this hashaka concept and about the size of shefeferes hadoit and many, many other dinim. We're going to go through the Mishnah, which will have, the way our version has it, 11 rules. So let's begin. Says the Mishnah. The rabbis added the following ma'alois, or chumres. These two words are going to be interchanged. Stringencies or higher standards. Mila means a standard or a higher standard, making kodesh even more susceptible to tumah than truma. Number one, if you want to make sure that utensils that will be used for truma is tahar and they're tamei, so the solution is, not always, but in most cases, take it to the mikvah. Can you put one utensil inside the other? Now let me add a very important nuance. If they are inserted one in the other tightly, then even for fluid, it's not kosher. When we take our kalim to a mikvah for a complete different topic, which might be biblical, might be rabbinic, when the Torah writes in Parshas Matilde the words v'tohed, and there we went on war, and we took the utensils of goyim. So there is a halacha again, it might even be biblical, that a kalim that belonged to a goy that now went into the possession of a Jew have to be toiveled, which is why we do tefillas kalim and we make a brach. So if we take off the stickers. If you have one keli inside the other, like two cups, and they're tightly inserted, That's a biblical chatzitza. If the majority of the cup, if the majority of the keli is not directly in touch with the water. Rabbinically, even if it's just a minority of the keli, but it bothers you. But what happens if one utensil is inside the other and it's not tight, it's loose? The waters are able to touch the outer part of both utensils. That's a kosher mikvah. Even if you're taking it to the mikvah for the sake of truma, and that's something that we learned in the Mishnah, Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, another rabbinic stringency. If I took it to the mikvah just for chulin, it's not even good for truma. But if I had in mind for truma, it doesn't bother me in the case where there is no chatzitza because it's loose, one or the other. Nevertheless, rabbinically, the Chachamim said that if one keli is inside the other, rabbinically, it's not okay. Now, is it not okay because of rabbinically we are afraid that maybe there was a chatzitza, or maybe there's another issue that will lead to a big machlokes we'll have in the Gemara amongst the Amoraim. Guys, let's count. That's halacha number one. Halacha number one is you cannot toivel a keli and a keli. Guys, when we go to the mikvah nowadays, tefillas kelim, we put one keli inside the other. It's not even for truma. You have to just make sure, that one doesn't adhere to the other. Halacha number two. Achoirayim will interpret this word to mean gaboy, which is the back, the outer part, the toich and the inner part, and a part of the utensil that's called base hatzivita. We'll leave for the Gemara the interpretation of this part of the keli. So guys, listen to this. If something has contact with a utensil, something that's tummy, it has halachic contact. So what happens? The whole keli becomes tummy. Yes. What happens if the source of tuma is only conveying tuma only on a rabbinic level? For example, I know we mentioned this in the last year, just to quickly mention it again, there are times that liquids, a liquid, not the saliva of a zav, but liquid that's tummy on the level of a sheni, midrabanan, not only becomes like a rishon, but midrabanan, any liquid that's tummy can be metame kelim. That's a rabbinic tumah. If it's only a rabbinic tumah, we say that only the part of the utensil that had direct contact with the source, with the rabbinic source of tumah, only that part becomes tummy. The other parts of the utensil remain tahor. So, but that's for chulin, that's for truma, but not for kodesh. For kachim, we don't make that differentiation. Even if the source is only midrabanan, if the keli is tummy in any one of its parts, all of it is tummy. Again, the outer part of the keli, the inner part of the keli, the tzvita part of the keli are considered three different kelim as far as truma is concerned. So if the source of truma touched the outside part, we'll say only the outside part is tummy on a level of a sheni, midrabanan. But if truma then entered the inner keli, we will say the truma is 100% good. Now, do we always separate the kelim into different parts? All of that will be clarified in the Gemara. That's only if every part of the utensil could function as an independent keli. So we have to learn a lot more about this din. Even on a rabbinic level, we don't always say this. But there are times that to the betterment, to the leniency of not furthering tuma, we could divide a keli into different parts by saying only that part became tummy, but never for kodesh. As far as kachim is concerned, we never will make the keli into anything other than one keli. And if the keli is tummy, all of it is tummy. If the source touched the outer part, kachim fell into the inner part. If the source touched the tzvita part and the kachim touched the outer part, it will become tummy. Halacha number 3. Very important. A person is carrying truma in an earthenware utensil. It's very important. The advantage of using an earthenware utensil, a earthenware keli can never become tamei if the source touched the outer part of it. So if I have a barrel that's filled with truma wine, first of all, it's already good. It's not so easy for the truma to become tamei. Am I allowed to carry at the same time that I'm carrying a barrel of truma? Can I carry midras, for example, shoes of a zav, shoes of a nida? Now, guys, what's the worst case scenario? That the shoes will touch the barrel. Even if the shoes touches the outer part of the barrel, it's not going to make the barrel tummy at all, because earthenware never becomes tummy if the contact was only in the outer part. So even if I'm carrying truma, zichud if I'm carrying chulin, but even if I'm carrying truma, I could at the same time carry midras, as long as the truma is in an earthenware utensil. But the Chachamim rabbinically said, I may not carry kachim in an earthen keli, in a barrel, or any other ceramic, anything that's made out of earthenware. At the same time that I'm carrying kachim, I'm not allowed to carry that utensil. Even though that's a very big stringency, because the only way it would be able to convey tumah is not only if, since I'm carrying it together, one touch the other, is if the midras went inside the barrel. How will that happen? I mean, a person is mindful of it, but maybe that's going to happen. So we separate kachim from tumah even on that level. Halacha number 4. Big day oichle truma, that garments of people that are mindful to stay away from tumah. They're not only eating chulin betara, these are people that are eating truma. So they are always mindful, I have to make sure that there's no tumah connected to truma, which is good. So they never had hesech hadas as far as truma is concerned. We learned this in the Yud Ches Amud Beis. The Chachamim said automatically is not considered guarded as far as kachim is concerned, and we go into the worst possibility. The worst possibility is that maybe this keli is tummy on the level of a midras, which means it's an av hatuma. Halacha number 5. Loi kimidas hakodesh midas hatruma. The word mida here means rule. They don't share the same rules, meaning, now this is clearly a halacha about chatzitza. So let me go into another scenario. Nowadays, we don't take clothing to the mikveh. Even though the clothing of a nida, in most cases, is midras, is tummy on the level of an av. Then, when Mashiach is coming, we're going to take clothing to the mikveh. Same problem of chatzitza on the body, the same problem on utensils, the same challenge you have on garments. Now, what happens if you have two garments that are tied one to the other? They're tied together. If they are tied tightly, that's for sure a chatzitza. Tightly meaning that when you put it under the water is unable to touch all of the parts of the garments. What happens if they are only loosely tied? You know, many times people would go into a river and the river is running. You're going into a spring. The spring is running. That's a kosher mikvah. But, I want to, in one go, put a lot of all of my garments. So I would tie it together and I would stick it in there and I'm a chayah. The thing is that when garments become wetted, they swell a little bit. And even though now it doesn't look like they're very tight, maybe when you put them under the water, they're gonna inflate, and they will now create a chatzitz. That's a chumrah. Do you have to be concerned for that only for kachim, not for truma? So says the Mishnah. Let's read it again. If I'm toiveling begodim for kachim, if they are tied together, even though it's loosely tied, that means that by biblical law, there is no interposition. Matir, I have to untie it. Another detail, not only do I have to untie it, but I have to first dry it. And then I'm matbel it. The people today, when they wash for bread, first they make sure their hands are 1,000% dry. It's connected to these dinim. And then you want to tie them together for its transportation, tie it together. But by truma, not only if the begadim are tied together, do you not have to untie it? You can lechatchila tie it together loosely. You can lechatchila kosher and then toivel it. And you don't have to be concerned whether it's dry or not. It can be wet. Now, wet, we said that rabbinically, if water becomes wet, it goes back to be a rishon. And if those waters are not washed off, then they can bite and make midrabanan. They can make the keli into a sheni. So all of these stringencies are something that we are not concerned about if the only focus is truma. Halacha number 6. Kalim hanigmana mitara. Kalim, when you're making a utensil, not garments, also garments, a table, a pot, prior to it being a finished product, it's b'chlal not susceptible. From when were people mindful to make sure it should not become tamei when they were reaching near the point where they're finished? So Kalim hanigmana mitara, as long as you were mindful from when it was getting finished, and now it's finished, and you know that nothing tamei touched it, do you have to toivel it now that it's ready? So if it's for kachim, yeah, tzrichim tefilla lakodesh. Avaloi letruma. For truma and certainly for chulin, as long as you did not have hesech hadas, which is what we learned in last year, not from the beginning, from when it was getting near to it being completed. So when it became completed, you know nothing tamei touched it. You don't have to take it to the mikvah. For kachim, a brand new keli always has to be taken to the mikvah. I'm making just an association that's completely not related, just a concept. I know I mentioned it a few times because I had a good experience with that. That like when you buy a new pair of tefillin, check it. You buy a new mezuzah, check it by someone else. It was just checked. Check it. That's the kind, you made a new keli, you know it never became tamei. If it's going to be used for kachim, it's a new keli, take it to the mikveh right away. Halacha number 7. Hakeli mitzaref masha b'toichel l'kodesh. I have a keli. I have a large plate. On the plate, I have 5 pieces of meat. Let me ask you a question. What happens if a source of tumah touches a piece of meat? Contact. Okay, so let's say that the source of tumah is a shlishi. It touches a piece of meat. Kachim. So you can argue that meat became a revi, and the other pieces of meat in the same utensil, even if they're touching, but they're different cuts, they're different pieces, will not become tamei, because by kachim, the end of the line is a revi. By kachim, we say that since they are all in the same keli, they are considered one item of food. So if a source of tumah touches any one of them, it's as if all of them had direct contact with the source. The keli is mitzaref, masha b'toichai, only for kachim. Avaloi l'truma. That means I like to mamish this example, that if you have truma items in a plate, even if they are touching each other, doesn't matter. They're separate pieces of food. So the ones that are not yet shlishi, listen, if the source is an av, then it's going to make the first piece into a rishon. And the next piece will be a sheni. The next piece will be a shlishi, but that's it. Every piece, even though they become tamei, they would go down a notch. We don't say that since they are in the same keli, they're considered all connected. You should know that this is a big topic. Every topic is a big topic. Just to make an association. We mentioned a few times about the separation of challah. The chiyuv of separating challah, today's rabbinic, is for when you make the dough. Ideally, prior to you baking. What happens if a person baked and they forgot to separate challah? So the halacha is, take all of the bread, challah, matzah, that was made from that batch, put it in a keli, and separate challah. When you make matzah nowadays, they do that lechatchila because they don't want to waste a second. They want to have the 18 minutes from the mixing of the flour and the water until when the product is final. So they make the dough, they make the matzah, they take everything out from that batch, and then they do afrashas challah. It has to be in the same keli. Do they have to touch each other? That's really connected to this topic. If keli is mitzaref it, then they're all connected. Let's go weiter. Halacha number 8. Haravi bar kodesh pasol bashlishi batruma. The end of the line by truma is only a shlishi. Kachim is more chamer, like we are saying. Kachim can become tamei even on the level of a revi. Halacha number 9. Or maila number 9. Chumra number 9. That batruma in nitmeis achas miyadav. If one of one's hands become tamei, two of hands is to begin with midrabanan. Midoraisa, either you entirely are taught or you are tamei. Number 2, midoraisa, a person can never become a sheni. Midrabanan, like we learned in the beginning that there are 3 reasons why one's hands will become tamei. Either hesech hadas, or even if you were not masiach das, if I touch a rishon, Biblically, a Rishon cannot make a person into a Sheni. Rabbinically, they make my hands. Now, if I touch the Rishon only with one hand, even for Truma, only that hand became Tamei. Only that hand has to be washed. But when it comes to Kachim or Kodesh, if one hand became Tamei, the other one became Tamei. Matbul Shteyem. Why? Third to last line in the Amid, because Shahayad Mitamei es Chaverta Bakodesh Avaloi Batruma. Milo number 10. Oichlim, Oicholim Neguvim. One is allowed to eat foods that never became wet from when they were disconnected from the ground, even though your hands are tamei, the yodai mesoyavois, as long as the food is either chulin or even truma, because when it comes to food, prior to it becoming wet with the knowledge and contentment of its owner, after it being disconnected from the ground, that food is not even mukhsher lakabel tuma. And becoming wet, by the way, doesn't only mean with water. So you have the mnemonic, the simon of yat shachadam. So if it became wet with water or with dew or wine or oil or blood or milk or bees honey, even though now it's dry, since it became wet once, it's mukhsher. It's now susceptible to becoming tummy. If we know it never got wet, it cannot become tummy. So even if the food is truma and the person eating it, his hands or her hands are sheni, we know it's yudayim misoy avois. That's another word for truma. Doesn't matter. You can eat the truma because the food never became mukhsher. But avaloi b'kodesh, if you have kachim food never became wet, doesn't need to become mukhsher. If any source of truma touches it, it will become tummy. And daf chaf aleph, getting into today's daf, halacha number 11, at least the way our Mishnah has it into 11, we'll see again that others consider 2 to be the same, so there's only 10, but here we're going with number 11, that a person who's an oinen. Now, an oinen is someone who's in the highest state of mourning for losing one of one's 7 halachic closest relatives. Normally, the oinen himself or herself will do the mitzvah of taking part of the burial, and they'll become tamei b'tumas meis. If that will be the case, we're not discussing that. There are times that a person doesn't have any tumas meis. Practical example, you're living in a different country, can't make it for the burial. So there's no tumas meis, but the person is in a state of aninus. What happens when they leave the state of aninus? Do they have to go to the mikvah? No, if they're not tamei, they're not tamei. For kodesh, Chazal made a takana. If you were an oinen, now that you left that state with all of the details, burial, if the burial happened on the day of the passing, maybe you're still an oinen at night, rabbinically, but whenever aninus is gone, the oinen, or another example, there are 4 people that not have to bring karbanos after they get out of their tumah. Let's go into a woman who gives birth. And by the way, all of our wives, when Mashiach will come, will have to bring all these karbanos, which they were unable to bring until now because we don't yet have a Beis HaMikdash. So on the 41st day after the birth of a boy, on the 81st day after the birth of a girl, you completely left all of the dinim connected to Tumah and Tara, to childbirth. You had the week or 2 weeks of Tumah. You had biblically the other totaling 40 days by a boy, totaling 80 days by a girl. Now you're good. You're back to your normal cycle. But on the next day, you have to bring karbanos. The woman, and before bringing karbanos, these people cannot eat kachim. Person is a mitzvah. They have to bring karbanos at the end of the purification process. A man is a zav who saw 3 re'iyas. He has to count 7 clean days. He's after all that. On the 8th day, he has to bring karbanos. So it's interesting that midirabanan, after they brought karbanos, for them to eat kachim, they got to go to the mikvah again. These are the 2 dinim. The oinen, who left the aninus. Now, if an oinen became tamei b'tumas meis, then it's irrelevant. They have to go to the mikvah to get rid of their corpse tumah. But in the case where there's no corpse tumah, they simply went away from that period of mourning. And umechusar kippurim, after they brought their karbanos, Midrabanan, prior to you eating kachim, you have to go to a mikvah. Tzarichem tefilla lakodesh. However, for anything that's not as holy as kodesh, even for truma, there is no such a rabbinic law. Avaloy lo truma. So these are the 11 milas or chumras that kachim has beyond truma. Hanania ben Chizkiah ben Gorim. Just going back to the Shemona Asada. Okay, second line from the top. Says the Gemara, let's go to the first case. Again, like we mentioned, even now when I go tefillas kelim nowadays, if two kelim are stuck one in the other, that's a chatzitza. The majority of the keli stuck, roiv umakbid, chatzitza midoiraisa. Either roiv or makbid, chatzitza midrabanan. The case of the Mishnah is you have two kelim, one inside the other, but they're loose. So the Gemara wants to know about kodesh ma'itamaloi. Since, listen, if they're stuck to each other, then even for truma it's chatzitza, even for chulin it's chatzitza. It's not stuck. So why did they make that takana? Answer number one. Answer number two. Rav Ila, Rav. Amar Rav Ila. There's a possibility that maybe the inner keli is going to weigh down inside the outer keli, maybe, and it's going to create a chatzitza. It's highly unlikely, but because of that possibility, for kodesh they made a takana, even though you saw it didn't weigh down. I mean, that's the rabbinic law. Look, you can't do one inside the other. In other words, the Rabbi Ila understands the reason for din number one in the Mishnah is because of there might be a chatzitz. Problem is that we just learned all of the 11. The halacha number 5 in the Mishnah, that if you have two garments that are tied loosely to each other, for kachim, you have to untie it and dry it. Because maybe under the water, it's going to swell up and it's going to become tight one and the other, and you're going to have a chatzitza. So the Mishnah already gave you a case where we have to be concerned for chatzitza by kodesh more than truma. Why would we have to have two cases? Does that not imply that the din of the Reisha has nothing to do with chatzitza? As it says in the Sefer, that the rule of kachim is not like the rule of truma. It's more serious. By kodesh, two kelim, two garments are tied to each other loosely. You got to untie it, matir it. Tanach, you have to dry it, and only then can you be makbal it. And then, if you want to, you can tie it together. By truma, not only do you not need to untie it, you can lechatchila tie it, kodesh it, and then you can toggle. So it doesn't that imply that the Reisha's rule is not chatzitza related? Answers the Gemara, no. Says Rav Ila, Reisha, rule number 1. Sefer, rule number 5 are both connected to the law of chatzitz. The reason why the Chachamim needed to specify both of these because each one has a novelty over the other. Because only the case of the Reisha, I would have thought that why is it that they were so machmer? You can never travel a keli inside the other. Makes sense, like we just said. Because at times the inner keli will weigh down. Mishum kavedai shel keli the ikal. But when it comes to the sefer, the lack of kavedai shel keli, there's no weighing down. They're tied loosely. Maybe they never would have enacted such a gezerah. So they needed to clarify. We are concerned about. Second to last line in the Amud. Same thing in reverse. If the Mishnah only would have taught the Maila that the Chachamim made in case number 5, Veyashmin and Seifa, Havamina, Hainu, Taima, the La Kodesh Loi, Mishum, Afchafalef, Amid Beis, that the Kitra, Bemaya, Ahadu Kemehadek, they are tied together. When you put a knot inside water, like we mentioned, it becomes tight because that's the nature. It absorbs water, it becomes fatter, it becomes larger, and now it might become tight. But by the Reisha, you know what water does naturally? Water has a floating effect on things that are in it. When you put something into water, it's not going to weigh down on the water. It's going to actually float up in the water. Avo Reisha, the Maya akfuye makfulomana, it makes Kalim float. So it's even farther away from the realm of possibility that the inner Kali will weigh down so tightly that it's going to create a chatzitza. Well, you have a chatzitza, and that's why it's tzricha. And now the Gemara says, now that we have this approach of Rav Ila, that the reason for case number one is related to chatzitza, Rab Ila now will be consistent with another statement that he made. Rab Ila l'taimei, the Amar Rab Ila, Amar Rab Chanina bar Papa. Even though when we went through the Mishnah, we counted 11 laws. When he made a recap, he said, Eser Mailu Shanukan. There are 10 scenarios where the Chachamim had this higher standard by Kachim over even Truma. Now, before we go on to the statement, how did he have 10 when the Mishnah gave 11? But that's the answer. Even though Chazal needed to speak out case 1 and case 5, at the end of the day, they're both about Chatzitza. So that's why we are able to summarize the Mishnah by saying there's only 10. But now he added another nuance. And that's connected to the beginning of last shiur, when we spoke about people who make a hachlata that they're going to treat their chulin as if it's kachim. So says, now all of these chumras that we learned now in our third Pedic, there are 10, 11 chumras by kachim. Are they only for kachim, or are they also for chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh? So he said, this is Rabbi Ila in the name of Chanin ben Papa, the first 5 cases of the Mishnah, bein la kodesh, bein la chulin shenasu taras hakodesh, is both for kachim, and even chulin that are not really kodesh, but if you chose to behave with your chulin, to treat your chulin as if you're eating kachim, then these enactments are effective for them as well. But achroina is the latter cases of the Mishnah are only dinim connected to kodesh and not connected to chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh. And the proof that Rabbi Ila l'taime is the number 10. But now let's focus on the statement. And what difference will there be on the first 5 and the other 6? So answers the Gemara, my tame, chomesh kamaisa, the first 5 dinim of the Mishnah, even though they are all rabbinic laws, but the is lohu derara the tuma midoiraisa. There is a connection to biblical tuma. Like, for example, chatzitza. Chatzitza is a biblical concern. I know that biblically, if 2 utensils are inside the other loosely, biblically it's not a problem, but this concern that it might become a chatzitza, something might happen that will make it problematic midoiraisa. And Rashi goes through all of the cases in the Reisha, every topic. We're not creating a rabbinic tumah. There's a biblical concepts that we're saying that maybe it will have a connection to a rabbinic tumah.
Is that
biblical tumah?
Is that the same problem? Is that the same problem with tying knots that they potentially can become?
Very good. Tying knots is connected. It's called berara the tumah midoiraisa. So since you might touch upon a biblical tumah, that's why when the Chachamim made a gzeira, they didn't only do it to kachim, but they also did it to chulin shel nasu al taras hakodesh. But basrai, so all of the latter cases of the Mishnah, it's never connected to a biblical concern. The least low derara the tumah midoiraisa. So therefore, even though Chazal were machmir, das rebuhu rabbanon only la kodesh, but la chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh le das rebuhu rabbanon. Like just for example, like we were saying that your hands, when you eat kachim, even if the kachim never got wet, right? My friends, hands are only sheni on hands is only a rabbinic. There is no sheni on hands b'chlal. I'm giving you an example. And all of the latter cases of the Mishnah, it's all like a rabbinic on top of a rabbinic. The whole concern is only rabbinic. And then on top of that, they made a gzeira that's very far-fetched. That's only for kodesh directly. Atkan, let's go back to the Atkan is Rabbi Ila's interpretation that the reason why for kachim you cannot toivel one keli inside the other is because it might interpose. Rava Omar, no, he disagrees with that. Me the Seifa, since the 5th case of the Mishnah, the untying of begadim is connected to chatzitza. Reisha la mishum chatzitza. Reisha haine taima, the reason why Chazal made a takana that you may not toivel a keli inside a keli for kachim, 3rd to last line, gezeda shalayatmel machotem v'tzinoiros b'kli she'en b'fit kishifei feres hanoid. A needle, a spinning fork, small utensils, which practically people were concerned when they took them to the mikvah, that they will get lost. One practical solution, put the needles inside a jug. So when you toivel the jug, you're going to have the needle is already in there. Much less likely that it's going to come out. Now hold on. Think about it for a second. The keli has to go into a mikvah. The jug that I'm putting into the mikvah I get the jug is going into the mikvah, but will the needle, will the spinning fork, or other small utensils that we use today, are they in the mikvah or are they in the jug that's in the mikvah? They are in the jug that's in the mikvah. Why would that be good? They're not directly in the mikvah. So the answer will be, like we spoke about in the intro, that as long as the outer keli's opening, mouth, has this size, which was the standard spout that people put in their drinking pouches, shefayferes hanoid. If it has that amount of opening, then the waters that are inside the jug, that are inside the bottle, are considered connected to the outer mikvah, and they are considered mikvah waters. Hashaka happened. But here's that gezeda. You might end up toiveling a keli whose opening doesn't have this shiur of kishoferes hanoid. Now, all of the other utensils that are inside the outer one are not in the mikvah. The waters in that utensil is bonafide mayim she'uvin. It's not mikvah. Even though I am toiveling it in a keli like this, and I see the opening is bigger than shefeferes hanoid, for kachim, chachamim made this takana, never do it. Let's read it inside. Kidetna, like we learned the Mishnah mikvos. That eruv mikvos, if you want to mingle mikvos through the means known as hashaka, the example is that we gave in the intro that nowadays, men and women, the water that we go into in the mikvah, that's not kosher mikvah waters. That was cleaned out, hopefully last night. They cleaned the tiles in the mikveh and they opened up tap water. Nothing here is kosher. But I'm mingling it with another mikveh that no one entered, so it stays clean for years. That's on the side of it. Ideally, the Rebbe Rashab says underneath it. But how are they halachically touching? Guys, if they're going to touch too much, then the waters will mingle so much, and the dirt of this one will go into that one. So you make the minimum size opening, as we all know. We go to the mikveh, look, and you'll see that both on the floor and on the wall, there are holes. So it says the Mishnah that in order for the mikvahs to be considered mingled, the opening has to be in the size of the standard shefayferes hanoid, the tube or the spout that wasn't the skin bottles that was commonly used in those days. Another nuance about that size, it has to be as large, not only as the hole, but as the thickness of the hole, which means it has to be as large as the outer circumference, not the inner circumference, the outer circumference. Daf chav beis. And what is that? I don't know the size of their standard spouts or tubes. So the Mishnah at least is helping us out by saying it's an opening, a circle in the size, that you are able not only to, with difficulty, stick in two fingers. These fingers, normally when Chazal speak about fingers, we're speaking about the thumb with the shalish's boys that we learned about. But here we're speaking about the index and the middle finger. You should be able to stick both of them and turn your fingers around. That's just a standard aperture or circumference of the inner part of the hole. Oh, so again, what? So now you get the takana. We are afraid that if you're going to use, if the outer keli has a very tight opening, then the kelim that are in there are not even good for chulin. That's a biblical issue. And the first cases of the Mishnah is connected, like we just learned, to a derara, the tuma midoraisa. But here, I'm toiveling it in a keli that has a large opening, this size or larger. The Chachamim made a takana. For kachim, it's not good. Savar, Rava, Kahada Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Baravua, not like we quoted Rab Ila, Amar Rav Chanina ben Papa, that when he finished learning the Mishnah, he says, on the Mishnah we have 10 stringencies. No. If the first case is not connected to chatzitza, it's a whole new takana. He concluded by counting the numbers the way we would, but he did it a lot deeper than we did it. In other words, he knew the reasons behind all of the chumras, and every one is connected to another halacha. Yud Aleph Ma'ila Shanukan, that our Mishnah is addressing 11 different stringencies. And he agrees with Rab Chanina bar Papa that only the first six are connected even to Chul and Shanasu al Taras HaKodesh. Sheish HaRashonos are Bein LaKodesh, Bein LaChul and Shanasu al Taras HaKodesh. As we had at the end of the second chapter, we are following the Tanoim that hold that Chulin, Shanasu al Taras HaKodesh is Kodesh. But Achroinois, only LaKodesh, Avalei LaChul and Shanasu al Taras HaKodesh. And like we learned before in my Ika, okay, and why? Because the latter are rabbinics on top of rabbinics. There's no derara, the tuma midairais. Now, is there a practical difference between the understanding of Ravila and the understanding of Rava in the first case of the Mishnah? Ma'ika bein the Rava bein the Ravila? Yes, there is a practical difference. And the practical difference will be if the outer keli is either a basket, a sal, or it's a gargusni. A gargusni is some sort of standard large strainer that was always used in the process of making wine. When the wine would come out of the press, before it would go into the lower vat, it would go through the strainer. These are kalim that never have a small opening. They only always have a very large opening. What happens if you fill these kalim up with other kalim and you took them to the mikvah? Lakoidish says the Gemara, Laman the Omar, that it's related to chatzitz according to Elah. I don't care how large the opening is. I don't care if the outer keli never has a small opening. The problem is that maybe the inner kalim will become very heavy and somehow the waters won't go to all of the parts of both kalim and you got a chatzitz. But according to Rava, that the only reason of the first rule in the Mishnah, the first milah, mishum gezeda shamayapol machatam tzinoides in a keli she'ein befit kishefeiteres hanoid. So then we're going to say that in the scenario where never is such a keli that little, sal and a gargusni she'ein befit kishefeiteres hanoid, there is no reason ever to be machmed. Even with all of these milas, it's going to be okay even for kosher. Let's hop another few lines over here because we have time. And this now will be consistent with something else that Rava said. The Amar Rava, Sal the Gargusne, again, this type of basket, this large strainer, that Shemilan Bekalem, that you fill them up with other utensils, Vihit Pilan. Now Rava did not differentiate for what, which means by inference, even if you are taking these items to the mikvah, for them to be used with kachim. Says Rava Tohoiden. And he adds, now these two utensils, both a basket, is very porous. The gargusni is a strainer, very porous. So let me ask you a question. What happens, right? Hakevel Sham, well, you also like Tefilla. What's going to happen if the sal and the gargusni, I'll just give you an example. You have two mikvahs, one on the side of the other, one on the side of the other. Both of them together have 40 saw, but you have this basket that's separating the sides. So the openings in the walls of these utensils, even though they are many, and if you were to add one with the other, you have a lot more than the keshefeferes hanoid, but you don't have one single hole that has that size. And what we are learning right now is that in order for you to be able to mingle one mikvah with the other, one opening itself has to have that size. One is enough. But if you have hundreds of them, but none of them have that size, then you can't mingle one mikvah with the other. So mikvah shechilkoi b'sal v'gargusni, if you separate two mikvahs, and now each half has less than 40 saw, you toivel on either side, well, you also like tefillah. And the example that we'll bring now, think about this. You know, again, we have tiles in our mikvahs. It's hard to relate. But then what tiles? Everything was made out of earth. What happens again if you have a large mikvah, but there is a wall of earth that's separating both sides? And it's very porous. It's not compacted. And we know that waters from one side are traveling through the wall to the other side. Throughout the whole wall. It's also not going to be good. Even though that if you were to add every hole together, you would have this shiur of 2 fingers that you can turn around. Plus, I don't care. That's not good enough. It's not all together. And that's Israel. The ha'ara kula, earth. The whole earth, not compacted earth, stam earth, is chalchule mechalcholam. It's very porous. And nevertheless, if you have, that's the way the Tosfos explains the Gemara, uba'inon the ika mem sa b'makim echad, every hole itself has to have 40 saw or more, but if you don't have it all together, and if the mechitza is very porous, we don't say waters are seeping from one side to the other, so they are connected. They're not connected. This is all just confirming the din of you have to have this shifrei fedes Hanoid. We'll stop over here. God willing, a lot more to be continued.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shkoyach.
Tumantara. Guys, it doesn't get better. Doesn't get better.